think I'm gonna try. I don't know. I don't think. No, I don't think so. Something. All right. All right. Good evening. Welcome. Let's let's pray, and then we're gonna get right into it. We're in Genesis, starting in 36 tonight. So, Father, we're grateful for this day that you've given us, Lord, and we're thankful for tonight. We're thankful for the word that you've given us, and Lord, as we follow this story along, Lord, I pray that you would continue to keep us filled with your Spirit, Lord, that we would have understanding, Lord, as the pieces just continue to get put together. It's an exciting thing to study your word, and Lord, I just pray that you would fill us fresh, Lord. I pray that you would give us just insight and again, understanding. Lord, I pray that we would be convicted and drawn to you by your word, and that you be glorified, Lord, that our hearts would be open and prepared for you to do the work that you desire to do. And the ground would be prepared, Lord, that we'd have ears to hear and eyes to see. And we just give you this time tonight. Lord, I pray that you would be with our study. I pray that you would be with the youth and the kids as well. And Lord, I just ask this all in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So we're in Genesis chapter 36. And just bear with me. I'm not feeling awesome today, so I'm doing my best. I might cough a little bit. Genesis chapter 36. Last week we closed off chapter 35. We looked at the death of Isaac. We saw the reunion between Jacob and Esau, and then coming back, and then we see the death of Rachel. We see the death of Isaac. And we are introduced again to Jacob's 12 sons. So now the story's going to start we're going to look briefly at chapter 36, which is just the genealogy of Esau. But we're just going to do a quick flyover, and we're going to keep moving on from there. I was talking to somebody earlier today, and we've talked about it before as we're going through Genesis, that understanding that the Bible is just following the relevant timeline. There's not enough time to go down every other road and follow every other genealogy of every other family that's ever lived. So this is following, especially in the Old Testament, it's going from Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and it's continuing on through. So that's where the story kind of focuses. As we look at the genealogy of Esau, there are a couple pretty key things to note, some important things to note. Some of his offspring that we're introduced to that we'll see later on that's interesting, but so let's go ahead and get into verse 1 of chapter 36. I'm going to probably, instead of trying to butcher names, I might just jump over some names. So again, just be patient with me. Now this is the genealogy of Esau, who is Edom. Esau took his wives from the daughters of Canaan, Adah from the daughter of Elon the Hittite, Aholibamah, the daughter of Anna, the daughter of Zibeon the Hivite, and Basemath, Ishmael's daughter, sister of, well, you know what? We're just going to skip to a couple different verses. Normally I wouldn't do this. Normally I would work through these names, but it's just a little difficult right now. Again, this is the genealogy of Edom, or of Esau, who is Edom. When you look at a map of Israel, Edom is on that southern end of Moab, over kind of where in Jordan on the other side of the Dead Sea. It's really interesting. When we were going through the minor prophets, the way that the Lord deals with Moab and the way that the Lord deals with Edom, he deals with them with more grace than he deals with a lot of the other neighboring tribes. I'm always struck by the picture of them being, if you go to Israel, you can be on the Israel side of the Dead Sea, and the Dead Sea is not very wide. You see the mountains on the other side, and those mountains are Moab, and just near there is also Edom. And you have these people who in proximity were so close to the truth, were so close to Israel, but proximity doesn't save. So it's just kind of an interesting side note and side story. It says that Esau took his wives, his sons, his daughters, and all the persons of his household, his cattle and all his animals and all his goods which he had gained in the land of Canaan, in verse 6, and went to a country away from the presence of his brother Jacob. For their possessions were too great for them to dwell together, and the land where they were strangers could not support them because of their livestock. Now, if you guys remember, when Jacob deceived Isaac, and first he steals the birthright, but then he deceives him by putting on the goat skins. And Esau is standing before Isaac, and he's saying, bless me, do you not have any blessing left? Isaac says to him, behold, your dwelling shall, and this is back in Genesis 27, says, your dwelling shall be of the fatness of the earth, and of the dew of heaven from above. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. And it shall come to pass when you become restless that you shall break his yoke from your neck. And so Isaac tells this to Esau, and now he finds himself in a place where Jacob has come back, and there's just not enough room in town for both of them. So kind of heeding the words of his father, or maybe not necessarily heeding the words of his father, but just the prophetic word at least coming true in the sense that he leaves and he departs. He breaks the yoke from his neck and he goes on. Esau dwells on Mount Seir. Esau is Edom. It says, this is the genealogy of Esau, the father of the Edomites, and Mount Seir. Now it goes down on just a couple notable people. I want to mention in verse 12 that one of the offspring that comes from Esau through Eliphaz is Amalek, which is where the Amalekites come from. The Amalekites being enemies of Israel throughout all of history. And then there's a couple other tribes that come through. If you were to go through and if you were to read this genealogy in its entirety, it is really interesting. And I apologize. I just don't really have the bandwidth to try to go through all these names right now. But if you read through it, you see a couple of things. First, they come into the land and they start assuming these titles for themselves, which is always a funny thing for me. I personally, I've always had I personally have a weird thing about titles. Like, titles bother me. I've seen people get weird with titles, but I've also seen it, and you see it in a lot of different cultures. But just sort of this assuming of titles. And the demanding to be called by your title, whatever that title is. And it's just always been bizarre. But these guys here, they come in and they start calling themselves chief, and they start calling themselves king, and they start just assuming in these sort of self-proclaimed titles that they've taken upon themselves. These were in verse 31, it says, these were the kings who reigned over the land of Edom, before any king reigned over the children of Israel. And they weren't kings in the sense that they were anointed by God. They weren't kings because it was a government that was established or set up by God. It's just, again, they've assumed this role. So it goes on into verse 40. It says, these were the names of the chiefs of Esau according to their families and their places by their names. Goes through and lists these guys, and it says, these were the chiefs of Edom according to their dwelling places in the land of their possession. Esau was the father of the Edomites. So they come in, they spread out, they're very prosperous. But that we kind of end there. We leave Esau at this point. Now, we come into chapter 37, and we're going to start to talk about Joseph. And with the exception of just a very little bit, really the rest of Genesis is about Joseph. The rest of Genesis follows Joseph. And the story of Joseph, and I'm sure that you're familiar to an extent, at least. The story of Joseph is a remarkable story. And as we've been going through, we looked at, like, even back at the ark, but you see it with Isaac. You see all of these pictures of Jesus. Throughout the Old Testament, you just see picture after picture of Jesus. And there's so many similarities that we see with Joseph, and even what we're going to look at in chapter 37 that points directly to Jesus. But just kind of getting the big picture idea, and then as we finish through Genesis, we're going to go through and really break it down. But it's just a fascinating thing. So what we'll look at tonight is you have Joseph, the brother who is really the point of envy or the point of jealousy in all the other brothers. His father, who he's highly regarded, he's highly loved by his father. His father sends him out to speak to his brothers, to check on his brothers. His brothers reject him. His brothers despise him. His brothers don't like the things that he says, and they end up selling him into slavery. And as he's sold into slavery, he finds his way to Egypt. And again, you look at the story of Jesus, and there's so many similarities in the sense that God sends his son to his people, to his children. He's rejected by his brothers. He's despised by his brothers. He's cast out to people that aren't his people, essentially. The gospel, we're talking about this as we're going through Romans right now, that the gospel goes out to the Gentiles. The Gentiles are saved through the gospel, and then the Jews are provoked to jealousy by the attention of God being put on the Gentiles and being provoked to jealousy through that. And with Joseph, you have him sold into slavery. He's sold into Egypt. He rescues Egypt by the grace of God, by the hand of God. He has this just divine revelation on how to save them through this famine that they're having. Saves all of Egypt, and then as a result of that, in the famine getting into Canaan, his people coming, his brothers coming to Canaan, and then he saves them as well. So it's a really cool picture of Jesus, where he goes to his people, he's rejected by his people, goes to another people that aren't his, and through that it provokes the jealousy, or draws the ones who are his people. It's amazing. We talk about it a lot, the redemptive plan of Jesus that was put in place before the foundation of the world, and just the wisdom of God and his patience and his long suffering, and his grace in all of it, and the way that he deals with all of us. So 37 begins, it says, "Now Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. This is the history of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers. And the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age. Also he made him a tunic of many colors." So Joseph is out tending the flocks, feeding the flocks with his brothers, and he basically comes and tells on his brothers. He brings a bad report against his brothers. And his brothers, they're not really, we saw last week with Levi and Simeon and the way that they dealt with that whole Dinah incident, and going into the town and convincing all of the men to be circumcised, and then going in on the third day and killing all of them, and then taking the women and children, just pretty horrific stuff. And so these guys aren't necessarily like the most upstanding kind of guys. And so Joseph is out there, young Joseph, he's out there, and he sees, it doesn't tell us exactly what he sees, but he goes back and he tells his father. His father favored him more than all the children. His father loved him more than all the children, because he was the son of his old age. And maybe it was his love for Rachel or what, but as he was born of Rachel, remember last week we talked about how Rachel passed away giving birth. So he was highly loved by his father. And it says his father made him a tunic of many colors. As far as the translation of that goes, there's a couple different ideas as the tunic of many colors. There's in the the translation holds both directions, whether it's a tunic of many colors or a long-sleeved tunic. Either way, it doesn't affect anything. The long-sleeved tunic would have been a tunic or a coat that would have been worn by royalty. They're not out working, they're not getting their sleeves dirty, so they would have a tunic that had long sleeves, and it was the same thing with the colors as well. So he makes whatever it is, he makes him a special coat that makes him stand out. He doesn't make it for anybody else. So not only do you have this young brother now who's coming in, who's kind of being like the goody-goody, who's telling on everybody for everything, but now he's got this special coat, like he's getting all this favoritism. And you would think that Jacob would probably be the one person that would realize the danger of favoritism. You can go back and you can consider Jacob's early life and how Isaac favored Esau over Jacob. And that favoritism towards Esau, and not to put it on Isaac, Jacob was every bit as responsible, but it at least aided in leading to that, the deception of his father. And so you just see the manipulation, the favoritism, all of these things and how detrimental they are. It says in verse 4, "But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, and they saw that through the coat, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him." So now there's just resentment. Now they're so full of resentment. They can't even look at him. They can't speak anything good about him. They hate him. Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. So he said to them, "Please hear this dream which I have dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Then behold, my sheaf arose and also stood upright. And indeed your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf." It might not have been like the wisest thing to gather the group around and say, "Hey, let me tell you about this dream I had." They're already mad at him because of the favoritism. He's got this special coat on. Now he's saying, "Look, I had a dream that everybody's going to be worshiping me and bowing down, not worshiping, but bowing down to me." It says his brother said to him, "Shall you indeed reign over us? Or shall you indeed have dominion over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed still another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Look, I have dreamed another dream. And this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me." So he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come and bow down to the earth before you?" And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Now we're going to get into these dreams later on as we continue through. It's just interesting, again, you have this young man who really doesn't have the discernment, I guess. And another thing to think about is that this isn't Joseph's fault. It's a dream that the Lord gave him, and he's sharing this dream. It's not Joseph's fault that his father's treating him the way that he is. But still, he finds himself at this place of being despised by his brothers and rejected by his brothers and hated by his brothers. He has this final dream. He tells them about it. His father rebukes him. His brothers envy him, but then it says his father kept the matter in mind. So there's something about it that kind of sticks in his head that he considers, that he keeps in mind. Then his brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." So he said to him, "Here I am." Then he said to him, "Please go and see if it is well with your brothers and well with the flocks, and bring back word to me." So he sent him out of the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. Now a certain man found him, and there he was wandering in the field, and a man asked him, saying, "What are you seeking?" So he said, "I am seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they are feeding their flocks." And the man said, "They have departed from here, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. So his father sends them out to Shechem. They're quite a ways away from home at this point. And it's almost as if they're just trying to get away, and they take their flocks and they go out into the wilderness far away. Joseph comes out looking for them, and there's a guy out there, whoever, just wandering in the field, and he asks him, "What are you seeking?" He says, "I'm seeking my brothers." So he directs them where they're at. It says in verse 18, "Now when they saw him afar off, even before he came near them, they conspired against him to kill him." So they see Joseph coming from far off. They see him, they conspire against him to kill him. Again, real similar to just the way the Pharisees deal with Jesus. There's this premeditation, there's this anger, there's this hatred that leads to some of these just major irrational responses. So just like the Pharisees, they conspire against him to kill him. Then they said to one another, "Look, this dreamer is coming. Come therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit, and we shall say some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what will become of his dreams." But Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands and said, "Let us not kill him." And Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood, but cast him into this pit which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him, that he might deliver him out of their hands and bring him back to his father." So you have Reuben kind of stepping in at this point. Everybody else wants to kill him. They're so fed up at this point. They're so far away from home. They think they can get away with it. They want to kill him. Reuben comes in, and again, you guys always hear me say it. I don't want to over spiritualize. I don't want to grasp for things. But you see the way Pilate dealt with Jesus. Even as the Pharisees bring Jesus to Pilate, they want to crucify Jesus. Pilate says, "Look, man, I don't find any fault with this guy." And he tries to appease the Pharisees by trying to figure out some kind of punishment, but certainly not crucifixion. But it's also just the apathy and the unwillingness to be bold in the moment, And Reuben, the same thing here. He's trying to choose the lesser of two evils here, trying to figure out how to do this. And so he comes up with a plan. Let's shed no blood, but cast him into this pit which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him. So let's not kill him directly, but we're going to put him in this pit, and then he's going to die. But we'll be gone. It's not really our problem at that point. That he might deliver him out of their hands and bring him back to his father. So it came to pass, when Joseph had come to his brothers, that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him. They took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty. There was no water in it. And they sat down to eat a meal. Then they lifted their eyes and looked, and there was a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels, bearing spices, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry them down to Egypt. So you have this caravan of these traders passing through. They sit down. They throw him into this pit. There's no water in the pit. They sit down to eat a meal, and they're about to leave him for dead. They see this caravan passing through, and again, kind of trying to find the lesser of two evils. They're going to figure out a way to get him down to Egypt instead of killing him. Judah says to his brothers, "What profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh." And his brothers listened. Then Midianite traders passed by. So the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. Then Reuben returned to the pit, and indeed Joseph was not in the pit, and he tore his clothes. And he returned to his brothers and said, "The lad is no more, and I, where shall I go?" So they took Joseph's tunic, killed a kid of the goats, and dipped the tunic in the blood. Then they sent the tunic of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, "We have found this. Do you know whether it is your son's tunic or not?" Again, another, we go back and you kind of think through the story of Jacob and Esau. And do you remember when Isaac told Esau to go out and to take some wild game and make him a stew of wild game? And the way that him and Rebekah ended up deceiving Isaac was through a goat. They killed a goat, and they deceived their father by using a goat. And that's the same thing. It comes back around again. We see a lot of these things coming back to Jacob, whether it's the way that he's dealt with Laban, and he finds himself there serving Laban for 20 years. And, a lot of these things, a lot of the patterns that he's established are being brought back around again. It says he recognized it. He recognized it and said, "It is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Without doubt, Joseph is torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth on his waist, and mourned for his son for many days. And all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him. But he refused to be comforted, and he said, "For I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning." Thus his father wept for him. I just imagine this scene where you have the brothers. First they were going to kill Joseph. Then they sell him into slavery, but they still tell their father that he's dead. Could you imagine? And then they bring the news to their father, and then he's mourning, and they're having to comfort their father. Just like the level of just gross deception that is just growing and growing and growing. And as far as they know, Joseph now has been sold into this caravan, and they don't know anything else from this point. They don't know where he's gone or anything. As far as Jacob is concerned, Joseph is dead at this point. Now the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. Now, because we have time, we're going to go through chapter 38 real quick. As we get into chapter 39 begins by saying, "Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there." So chapter 39 verse 1 picks up right where chapter 37 ends. Chapter 38, we're going to go through it. We're going to go through it quickly. It's a pretty gnarly chapter. Some of the content in here is pretty bizarre, pretty heavy, uncomfortable content. But I think that there's a purpose for it. And as we go through, we're going to talk about Judah and Tamar. And let's just go ahead. We're going to read through it, and then I'll make a couple notes or points after. Chapter 38 says, "It came to pass at that time that Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adullamite whose name was Hira. And Judah saw that there was a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua, and he married her and went into her. So she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name She conceived again and bore a son, and she called his name Onan. She conceived yet again and bore a son, and called his name Shelah. He was at Chezib when she bore him. Then Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord killed him. And Judah said to Onan, "Go into your brother's wife and marry her, and raise up an heir to your brother," which was the custom at the time. If the oldest brother was married and he died without having children, the custom was that the next brother in line would marry so that the line could continue on. Says verse 9, "But Onan knew that the heir would not be his, and it came to pass when he went into his brother's wife that he emitted on the ground, lest he should give an heir to his brother. Then the thing which he did displeased the Lord, therefore he killed him also. Then Judah said to Tamar his daughter-in-law, 'Remain a widow in your father's house till my son Shelah is grown,' for he said, lest he also die like his brothers. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. Now in the process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died, and Judah was comforted and went up to his sheep shearers at Timnah, he and his friend Hira the Adullamite. And it was told Tamar, saying, 'Look, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep.' So she took off her widow's garments, covered herself with a veil, and wrapped herself, and sat in an open place which was on the ground, which was on the way to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown, and she was not given to him as a wife." They were just afraid that he was going to follow he was going to die just like his brothers. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a harlot because she had covered her face. Then he turned to her by the way and said, "Please let me come in to you," for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. She said, "What will you give me so that you may come in to me?" And he said, "I will send a young goat from the flock." So she said, "Will you give me a pledge till you send it?" Then he said, "What pledge shall I give you?" So she said, your signet and cord and your staff that is in your hand. Then he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. So she arose and went away and laid aside her veil and put on the garments of her widowhood. And Judah sent the young goat by the hand of his friend the Adullamite to receive his pledge from the woman's hand, but he did not find her. Then he asked the men of that place, saying, where is the harlot who was openly by the roadside? And they said, there was no harlot in this place. So he returned to Judah and said, I cannot find her. Also the men of the place said, there was no harlot in this place. Then Judah said, let her take them for herself, lest we be ashamed. For I sent this young goat, and you have not found her. And it came to pass about 3 months after that Judah was told, saying, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has played the harlot. Furthermore, she is with child by harlotry. So Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. When she was brought out, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, by the man to whom these belong, I am with child. And she said, please determine whose these are, the signet, the cord, and the staff. So they make this arrangement early on. I'll pay you a goat. What's your collateral? The collateral is the staff and the signet. So she goes out and she says, this is who's, I'm pregnant by this person who these belong to, and it's his stuff. So it kind of backfires on him a little bit. So Judah acknowledged them and said, she has been more righteous than I, because I did not give her to Shelah my son. And he never knew her again. Now it came to pass at the time for giving birth, that behold, twins were in her womb. And so it was, when she was giving birth, that the one put out his hand, and the midwife took a scarlet thread and bound it on his hand, saying, this one came out first. Then it happened, as he drew back his hand, that his brother came out unexpectedly, and she said, how did you break through? This breach be upon you. Therefore his name was called Perez. Afterward his brother came out, who had the scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zerah. Now, I'm going to jump ahead to Matthew. And this is the reason why I think this story, it seems out of place. It's really bizarre. It seems like something that doesn't necessarily need to be included. But when you start to look at the lineage of Jesus in Matthew chapter 1, it says the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. It says Abraham begot Isaac, Isaac begot Jacob, and Jacob begot Judah and his brothers. Judah begot Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Perez begot Hezron, and Hezron begot Ram. And it continues on from there. But I think it's significant. I think it's worth noting that as we look at the genealogy of Jesus, you can go back and you can see how messed up it is. How just, it's not perfect. It's not a perfect genealogy. It's not these perfect marriages and these perfect families and these righteous children and they were obedient. There's a lot of mess. And it's such a cool thing when you consider that that's the line that the Messiah came from. And we've talked about this recently, but and looking at that and considering that, you really see, I believe, the reality that the gospel is relevant and necessary for everyone. We've talked about it as we were going through John, but as you see, as Jesus is born, the first people that get the message are the shepherds. As Jesus at the resurrection, the first people that get the message are the women. It's not the nobles, it's not the Pharisees, it's not the kings, it's not like the message doesn't go out in the palaces. You would think, at least if it was us, if we were the ones writing the script, you would think that there would be decrees in the palaces and in the castles and stuff, but that's not the case at all. That it's the shepherds, it's the angels that are proclaiming it to the shepherds in the fields. And what that does is it makes the gospel everybody's gospel. And I just think that's such a sweet thing. And another thing that's I think is so cool about it is that God is not ashamed to include these things in his story. And I think a lot of times, and when we look at our stories, our personal stories, our own testimonies, there's a lot of gnarly stuff that's our fault. There's a lot of things, a lot of decisions that we made. And, if you go back and you look at the road that you've gone down, a lot of it is a result. A lot of it is just consequences of our own decisions. But even in that, God's faithful to redeem. He's faithful to restore. He's faithful to use those dirty things, those filthy things for his glory. But here in this situation, even in his story, as he made a covenant with Abraham, and he made a promise, and that promise continued down through Abraham, through Isaac, through Jacob, through Joseph, through Judah, through Perez, through this really messed up relationship that we read about in chapter 38. Again, it's a weird story, but I love that it's included because we really see that picture there. We're going to kind of wrap up here in just a second. I do want to say that as you look at, as we get into this, looking at Joseph's life now, and I'm glad that we got through 38 so we can just get into the rest of Joseph's life from here on out. But you see the way that the Lord uses this situation. And Joseph is sold into slavery. He's despised. He's rejected by his brothers. He's as good as dead. He's sold into slavery. He's completely unwanted by anybody. And he doesn't know what's going to happen. He doesn't know what the Lord is going to do through this. He's been given a dream, but I think sometimes we might be given a dream and then we find ourselves in circumstances that looks like maybe that dream was just something we thought up. But he comes into Egypt, into Potiphar's home, and we're going to pick up with that next week, and we're going to start to talk about that. But one of the really sweet things that you see about Joseph, and it reminds me the same as Daniel. At the beginning of Daniel, when he's taken into captivity and he's in Babylon, it says that Daniel purposed in his heart that he wouldn't be defiled by the king's delicacies, which means Daniel purposed in his heart that he was going to stay holy, that he was going to stay righteous, and he wasn't going to allow himself to be manipulated by these shiny, pretty, good things of the world. He was in the palace. He kind of had anything that he could have wanted, but he purposed in his heart at the beginning that he wouldn't be defiled. And there's this heart, there's this attitude of holiness and righteousness. And then we see the same thing with Joseph. As Joseph continues on, he's there in Potiphar's house, and then Potiphar's wife tries to have a relationship with him, and he flees. And he leaves behind his coat, to the point where he's caught and he's thrown into prison. But it was more important for him, even in that situation, to be right before the eyes of the Lord than to try to cover himself. He never went back for his coat. He never tried to do anything like that. He just got out of there. And I really believe that his heart was that he would be righteous before the Lord. And even in that, he says, how could I do this great wickedness? And understanding sin is sin and calling it what it is. And you see this pattern in Joseph's life, this pattern of righteousness, this pattern of, just like Daniel, purposing in his heart, determining in his heart how he's going to act, how he's going to respond. And you just see the Lord walk him through. And it's a long period of time. So I don't want to spoil too much, but as we go in here, he'll be in prison. There's the butler and the baker, and they're in prison, and he interprets dreams for them, and these just radical interpretations, and they come true. And he says, hey, don't forget about me when you go back. And 2 years later, because they had forgotten about him. 2 years is a long time to be forgotten about in prison. And you start wondering if you're ever going to be remembered again. And just the patience in these guys, and the patience and the endurance and the staying holy, staying true even in those situations is awesome. And to eventually where it gets to where he's standing before his brothers, and they realize that it's him, and they're weeping, and they're afraid. They're afraid that they're going to lose their life. And he tells them not to fear. He says that what the enemy intended for evil, God intended for good. And just that perspective, even in that situation. So there's a lot to learn, a lot to glean from this as we go through. I'm excited. Again, pretty much the rest of Genesis deals with Joseph. There's a big chunk dedicated to him. So it's going to be cool to kind of switch gears a little bit and start to go through and talk about this. So I'm going to go ahead and pray. We're going to wrap up a few minutes early. And then maybe, Rachel, you could turn the computer off. All right. Father, we thank you again for this evening. And for these truths. And Lord, I just pray that you would just write these things in our hearts, Lord. And Lord, as we consider people like Joseph and the trials that he's gone through and the things that he's endured and the hopelessness, I don't know. I can't imagine what it's like to first be thrown into a pit thinking that you're going to be left for dead, and then being sold by your own brothers into slavery. And just, we even watching them as you go out of view, and just the abandonment, Lord. And but even with Joseph, you were there always. You never left him alone. And Lord, you are the same with us. And Lord, I just pray that you would continue to speak to us through your word, that you would strengthen us in your word, Lord, that you'd be glorified in us, and that you would fill us fresh, Lord. And we do pray that you would come quickly. Lord, I just pray that you would help us to be found faithful. Lord, there's a lot of things that we're praying about, a lot of things today. It's just a lot of unique things that we've been praying for today. And Lord, you know what those are. I just pray that you would be in all of those, and Lord, that we would trust you, that just like Daniel, that we would purpose it in our heart to be pure, to be holy, to be true. Lord, that we would follow in these examples, and more than anything, that we would look to your Son. And